The masons worked quickly in the January cold, their breath fogging as they mortared stone after stone across the opening. Inside the niche, barely wider than her shoulders, a woman named Aishi pressed her palms against the shrinking rectangle of lamplight. She had been a Haseki Sultan, mother to a prince, draped in emeralds just 3 months ago. Now, she was being bricked into Topkapi Palace's foundation wall, alive and fully conscious, because she had whispered the wrong name during a winter fever dream. The last stone slid into place. Absolute darkness. The temperature inside the sealed chamber plummeted as Istanbul's winter penetrated the walls. She could hear her own breathing accelerate, feel the stone leaching warmth from her body. This was the Ottoman harem's ultimate punishment. And you need to understand something crucial. The paradise you've imagined never existed. Western fantasy painted the imperial harem as an exotic wonderland of pleasure and silk. The reality? It was a frozen hell where beauty was the bait in a trap that destroyed souls long before it destroyed bodies. For the hundreds of women locked inside Topkapi's harem quarters during the 16th and 17th centuries, winter was when the torture became unbearable. The Bosphorus winds screamed through latticed windows. Marble floors turned ice cold. And escape became literally impossible as snowdrifts blocked secret passages and guards doubled because frozen ground preserved footprints. Let me show you what actually happened behind those gilded walls when winter darkness fell over Istanbul. The torture began the moment a girl arrived. Usually during autumn, slave markets when conquered populations were sold before winter made travel impossible. She might be 8 years old, 12, 15 captured in a raid on a Circassian village, or sold by her own starving family during a harsh winter. The first thing they took wasn't her freedom. She already lost that. They took her identity. Her birth name was erased completely. She received a new Turkish or Persian name, Gulbahar, meaning spring rose, though she'd entered during winter and would likely never see spring as a free woman again. Her religion was stripped away through forced conversion. Her native language was forbidden speak at once and received 10 lashes across your back in the freezing courtyard where your blood would steam in the January air. Her family became ghosts she was trained to forget, because remembering them was classified as defiance. One African slave girl, named Nakshidil, captured at 14 during winter, 1768. Later wrote that the psychological breaking process took exactly 40 days in an unheated stone chamber where new slaves were prepared. 40 days of isolation, cold, hunger, and repetitive indoctrination until their past lives felt like fever dreams. This wasn't accidental cruelty. This was systematic soul destruction designed to create perfect servants with no identity except their function, property of the Sultan. And winter made it more effective because cold breaks people faster than heat ever could. But here's where it gets truly diabolical. The harem wasn't just a prison. It was a hierarchy designed to turn victims into each other's torturers. At the top sat the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, who ruled this female world with absolute power. During winter months, when the Sultan rarely visited the harem's freezing quarters, she was essentially God. Below her were the Haseki Sultan's favored concubines who'd borne sons and the Kadin Effendi, mothers of the Sultan's children. At the bottom were the Kariyeler, fresh slave girls, who were little more than servants, shivering in unheated rooms, dreaming desperately of receiving the purple handkerchief. That handkerchief was the Sultan's invitation to his bed. The only possible path from freezing servant quarters to heated chambers with braziers and fur-lined blankets. So the women weren't united by their shared suffering. They were pitted against each other in venomous competition where winter made the stakes even higher. A single night in the Sultan's heated bedroom could mean the difference between freezing to death in servant quarters and surviving winter in luxury. This created a viper's nest, where poisonous whispers were more common than physical warmth. A woman who gained favor would find herself with 1,000 enemies overnight, each one fantasizing about her destruction while their fingers went numb in the January cold. Constant surveillance made paranoia a survival skill. The Kislar Agassi, the chief black eunuch, commanded an army of eunuch spies who watched everything. Every conversation whispered near a brazier. Every friendship formed over shared blankets during freezing nights. Every tear frozen on a cheek in the morning. The lattice screens weren't just architectural details, they were surveillance infrastructure. You could never see who watched from behind them, but someone always watched. During winter, when women clustered together for warmth, the eunuchs would note who huddled with whom, reporting potential alliances to the Valid Sultan. Privacy didn't exist. This constant scrutiny was psychological torture that winter intensified. Imagine living every frozen moment under a microscope, knowing that seeking warmth from the wrong person could be classified as conspiracy. The deadliest weapons weren't daggers. They were whispers that traveled faster than warmth through stone corridors. A woman who'd enjoyed the Sultan's favor for months might wake one January morning to find herself accused of witchcraft because a rival spread rumors that she'd used sorcery to make him desire her during winter when he normally avoided the cold harem. Or worse, whispers of infidelity. A eunuch reporting that he'd seen her speaking with a male servant near the kitchens. It didn't matter if the conversation was about requesting hot coals for a brazier. The accusation alone could mean death, and the torture of hope followed by despair. That was the harem's signature cruelty. A concubine named Mahidevran experienced this perfectly. She was Sultan Suleiman's favorite through the brutal winter of 1520, showered with jewels and furs while snow buried Istanbul. Then Harem Sultan, a newer concubine, caught his eye. Mahidevran went from heated apartments to the old palace, the place where forgotten women were sent to freeze slowly into obscurity. She lived another 48 years in that exile, watching younger rivals through windows. Her hands eventually crippled by arthritis from the cold, her mind destroyed by the memory of power she'd tasted so briefly. To experience absolute luxury only to have it ripped away and face decades of cold poverty, that psychological torture was deliberately engineered. But the supreme mental torment involved motherhood and the law of fratricide. When a woman bore the Sultan a son, she achieved the highest possible status, Haseki Sultan, with enormous power and heated rooms year-round. Yet she'd also just given birth to either a future emperor or a future corpse. Mehmed the Conqueror had institutionalized the law. When a new sultan took the throne, he could, and usually did, execute all his brothers to prevent civil war. Imagine nursing your infant son during a February snowstorm, loving him desperately, knowing that his entire future depended on his father outliving all other princes. If his father died tomorrow, your son would either ascend the throne or be strangled with a silk bowstring by executioners who'd watched him grow up. Mothers weren't rivals for affection. They were players in a death lottery where their children were the tickets. When Sultan Mehmed III took power in 1595, he had 19 brothers strangled in a single day. 19 mothers woke that January morning to discover their sons' bodies. The joy of motherhood was permanently poisoned by the knowledge that loving your child meant praying for other children's deaths. This was monstrous psychological architecture unique to the Ottoman system. And winter made it worse, because winter was traditionally when sultans died from pneumonia, from flu, from infected wounds that wouldn't heal in the cold. Every winter brought fresh terror to the mother's chambers. While psychological warfare was daily reality, physical torture enforced the rules when minds wouldn't break. Flogging was routine. A woman could receive 30 lashes across her bare back in the winter courtyard for something as minor as speaking without permission. The cold made the whip cut deeper, and wounds healed slower in winter conditions. Starvation in freezing isolation cells was another favorite. Deep within Topkapi's foundations were windowless rooms where temperature matched the outside winter air, sometimes below freezing. Women would be locked there for days with no blanket, no brazier, no food, just stone walls, weeping with condensation that froze into ice patterns. Screams didn't travel through those thick walls. Guards would find them hypothermic, sometimes dead. Fingers blackened with frostbite. But for proven adultery or plots against the Sultan's life, there was a legendary punishment whispered about in the freezing dormitories, the sack and the sea. The Bosphorus method: a condemned woman would be bound hand and foot during the darkest part of a winter night. Sometimes a live cat or snake was forced into the sack with her, the animal's panic adding to the terror. She'd be sewn into a heavy leather sack weighted with stones, then loaded onto a boat. The rowers would head toward the Bosphorus Strait's deepest point, where currents ran strongest. The water temperature in January was approximately 4 degrees Celsius, cold enough to stop your heart before drowning finished you. The weighted sack would be cast into that black water with a heavy splash. Then silence. No trial, no grave, no prayers.